I grew up in a small seaside village in Western Canada, and most summers I traveled across the country to my grandmother's summer cottage on the shores of Lake Simcoe in southern Ontario. The walls were covered in classic cottage decor, including a series of felt pennants from every country my grandmother had visited during a European excursion in the early 60s. There were newspaper clippings pinned to the wall, yellowed recipes and news items. In the back kitchen, which always smelled of turpentine, someone had tacked up an aerial photograph of London. England, not nearby London, Ontario. I spent a lot of time looking at that mysterious view. At the bottom of the poster was the famous Samuel Johnson quote I've now heard repeated, mangled, and paraphrased many times. "When a man is tired of London, he is tired of life. For there is in London all that life can afford." I didn't understand it at the time. The view of Tower Bridge looked grey and forbidding. It begged the question, what kind of person ended up in London? Years later, that person was me. I moved to London in the middle of a petrol strike in the autumn of 2000, a time of panic buying, political recriminations, and worries about food distribution. I arrived on an overnight transatlantic flight from Toronto and emerged from Clapham Junction train station in the afternoon. The traffic was light. The sun was warm. The newspapers warned of impending disaster, riots, and a return to the 70s, as if this city could ever move back in time. I knew no one, really, but I had a contact. I was retrieved from the station by an Australian friend of a friend who had just enough fuel for the journey to my new home on a short street in Brixton without us having to get out and push the car. Here we were, two colonials coasting on fumes in London at the start of a new century. From the window of my new room, I could see the blinking light of the HSBC Tower in Canary Wharf, then the tallest building in England. But what lay between was a mystery. So I turned to the London A to Z, given to me by a friend who had lived in London years ago, who had been so sickened by the damp he chose Prague instead. I soon learned that for many, the A to Z is an article of faith. Designed around the same time as the iconic tube map in the 1930s, it is equally omnipresent in the city, used as much by residents as tourists. It doesn't simply show you the way home so much as prove that the rest of London, the parts that aren't part of your daily routine, still exist. In those first few weeks, I saw it tucked into handbags and on the dashboards of cars, an essential companion to the city. I was grateful for the gift, though its pages were yellowing and slipping from its plastic rings. I tested it out on the first night and flipped from my new home on page 93 east to page 94, then north to page 79, and east to Canary Wharf on page 80. It is an impressive spread for a new reader. The bottom half of the 2 pages are filled with a mess of streets, twisting and ending, some with illegibly small names. Some seem to give up, disappear, and fade back into the page. At the top of pages 79 and 80, the Thames curved around the Isle of Dogs and then made another U around Blackwall Point. There was a descending list of wharves printed on the blue of the river: Morden, Enderby's, Piper's, Badcock's, Lovell's, Palmer's, Columbia. And I wondered if any still served a nautical purpose, or if they'd become mere decorative names. Printed in the 90s, my A to Z showed the demolished Southeastern Gas Works, where the Millennium Dome now stands. Most A to Zs are half dead, because documenting a city as alive as London will always be an impossible task. I walked around my neighborhood. I lurched around, graceless, with a rucksack on my back. I looked at people's faces on escalators for a second.